Hull materials. There's so many differing opinions on which is the best one, but in reality, they all have their pluses and minuses. Now, instead of me just talking to you guys about the different types of hull materials, I decided to interview people who have those boats and cruise on them and live on them full time and know those hull materials through and through. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at fiberglass hulls.
Matt of MJ Sailing, and we are building a 42-foot performance catamaran, fiberglass, which is the important part right now in this discussion, but fiberglass catamaran in the Annapolis area.
Why did you choose fiberglass for your hull material? Because you've had fiberglass before, and then aluminum, and then you went back to glass.
We loved our aluminum boat for the utility part of it. The fact we didn't have to really worry about it. With that particular boat, it was a 1983 hull. When we bought it, it had a few issues with it. We went through and re-welded in a equivalent of about a 4x8 sheet of plywood or 4x8 sheet of aluminum to fill in the holes and correct it. Even though we went through all that, there was still the issues of just age and neglect that kept popping up. On a new aluminum hull, great. Love the idea there. But with a performance catamaran, aluminum can work, but you start getting into, especially this length, it needs to be longer then, because really the thickness that you need for aluminum is going to be about 4 millimeters for the minimal thickness that you can get with it. Otherwise, when we start bringing that down to a 42-foot boat overall, we start adding up too much weight. When we add that all together. Anything smaller than that becomes difficult to weld. It becomes difficult to keep straight. Otherwise, you start having distortion that you get with that. And anytime you touch anything, basically, you'll start denting and causing problems there. So that was really the catalyst that pushed us over into fiberglass, is we could get the same strength, get as stiff of a boat, which is really what we were looking for, in a lower weight. And build in all of the flotation that we have in it. We don't have the issues of condensation that we had even in our insulated aluminum boat. We still had condensation problems with that, just being the metal. The decks were always hot when we were in the warm climates. They're always cold when we were in the cold climates. And so we kind of eliminate that by going with a cored fiberglass hull.
All right, and what's the length and displacement, and also the beam, because catamaran?
So the beam is just under 25 feet, it's 24.7 and some change, so a little over 25 and a half, or 24 and a half. Length is going to be 44 feet. Right now we are 42, but we have extensions for the stern. And weight, our light ship weight will be about 11,000 pounds. Loaded up full displacement, we're about 16,000.
You're also building foam core. So your opinion on no core, foam core, and then the favorite, balsa core.
Balsa core is phenomenal, actually. It's actually a wonderful, wonderful thing. It's just how it's built. So that's the important part. It is, for weight, it is actually one of the greatest things to do as a coring material, is to actually use balsa. But as everyone knows, if there's any time that you get a penetration, anything where water can get in there, then you do have some coring issues. So that was part of the reason why we went to foam core. One of the other things too is resale value, much better on foam core boat because of the issues, historic issues that people have had with balsa. Now I have a lot less fear of a new build balsa boat than what they did before, so that I'm okay with it. We would have gone that route. It's just, this is what was available. This is kind of the direction we wanted. It's a bit more expensive. Pound for pound, it actually probably will be a little bit more weight as well with going with the foam core, because we need to make, for the same stiffness for the panels, they actually need to be thicker core to compensate for that ability that balsa has to resist bending and the shear that you get. It's a lovely material. It's just bad for decomposition, for if you end up getting water in it. So we went with foam core for this. The beauty of it is you can change the thickness of the core everywhere. So everything can be adjusted. We can, where it needs it, we can have a little over an inch. We can have less than an inch. The smallest that we go down to for the coring is 12 millimeters, so just under half an inch. But it does allow us to vary that along with the lamination that goes on top of that to give those the panel stiffness wherever we actually need that. Versus a solid fiberglass boat can be a great thing. you have to build it so incredibly thick to compensate for not having coring in there, or you have to have frames. So it's basically all got to be framed out just like you would a metal boat. To get that strength in there, we really, for a solid glass, you have to go incredibly thick to just make up for that. Or you start doing hat frames, you start doing all these extra things that go in that to compensate for that. It's much easier just to put a core in there. Again, it gives you that insulation, it creates a lot lighter of a panel, and in the end, it ends up being a lot stiffer of a panel as well.
Now, everyone's favorite, you're out sailing, great day, and you hit something.
Yep.
What happens to your boat now?
So in a typical boat, a typical cored hull, so we're cored everywhere. There's no solid glass at any point except for the chain plates. We're foam core anywhere. You will have issues. There's no problem with that. No way around that. So ours is all infused foam core. In the hull sections, they're kind of like what they do with Balsa. They're individual blocks, little over about 1 inch by 1 inch, to give you an idea there. If you were to penetrate or break that hull lamination, actually get into the coring, the water in theory can't flow any further past those little points. So they're individual cells along there. You can see each one of those cells here. And then the perforations are to allow the resin to flow from the front to back of the lamination when it's going. And the same thing, they end up flowing through there. So anywhere that there's a curve, these are actually curved pieces. So it allows it to bend when it's getting infused. The flat panels like this, you can see just the perforations because this foam didn't need to be able to bend within a mold like it did on the stuff behind us. And again, those little perforations just allow when you're infusing, so you're using the vacuum to suck the resin out of a pot basically in, and it then flows through the medium. It ends up flowing through the fiberglass front and back and laminating all that in one go without touching it, without needing to put your hands on it at all. Now, ours is a bit different because everything is watertight on this boat. If we were to, it's basically got double bottoms. We could rip off the entire bottom of the boat above the water line and we're still structurally intact. The sole, under the floor of each one of the hulls are individual cells, about 1.5 feet by about 2 feet long and about 1 foot deep. And each one of those is a watertight bulkhead, watertight space. So each one of those could be penetrated and it's not going to overflow or flow into anything else of the boat. So that, it's mainly there to add stiffness to the boat. Very, very stiff skeletal structure by having that in there, but it also gives us that double bottom part of it. Tanks can go in there too, so you do get some benefit there. You do lose storage then because you can't store anything, of course, in this. They need to remain watertight, so you can't have any penetrations in there at all. But it does give us that confidence that we could truly rip the entire bottom off the boat and we're still going to float even on that hull. And then beyond that, we do have the front and back of the boat. The first 13.5 feet of the boat are multiple watertight bulkheads at multiple heights too. So again, it's that principle of you can penetrate multiple of those things and they're not necessarily going to flow over. They can't get into the next one. And the aft 5.5 feet of the boat is watertight bulkheads as well. So yeah, it's not an issue at all. And then the front of the boat too, the area up above is watertight as well. And that's more for buoyancy. So if you ever were to invert the boat over, if it was ever to flip over, it would float high then. So that's the idea there. But just the core itself of the boat has more buoyancy than what the displacement of the whole boat does anyway. So you could rip it up into 100 pieces and those 100 pieces are still going to float. So it's going to be, I can't possibly think you would have to put a big weight inside to sink the boat. It's just impossible to do.
Boat makes it to shore because it still floats. What's the repair process look like now?
The way it typically works, and one of the benefits of having a catamaran is you can take a mold off of the other side. So you have a built-in second mold. And the way the process would work is we would mold off of a good section, that curve, everything we need. You'd lay up the glass in that area, in that mold. You'd put in the coring, you'd put the additional glass on the inside, get that all set up so it's basically another hull section, and then you would fare that in and glass that in. It's actually a pretty easy process, and it's the same idea as to the extensions that we're adding to the stern. Same idea, we just mold it off of a different section, move it further aft, and finish it off the way we want it.
Okay, and how easy is it to repair? You're saying like that pretty complicated sounding job is easy.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that repairing fiberglass is pretty straightforward?
It's very straightforward, and it's very easy to do anywhere. And that was one of the negatives we had with the aluminum boat. Whenever we needed to add anything, it needed to be welded on. To do that, you needed a very high-powered welder, not something that you're easily able to carry or power on a boat. Not only that, you typically needed gas for, depending on what type of welding we were doing, but you need gas for that, and you need the same aluminum, so same grade. We were 5083 aluminum, which is a boat building, a marine type of grade of aluminum. And you would have to get that same type in some random port in the middle of nowhere, which is not going to happen at all. Fiberglass, you can get anywhere. It may not be the exact stuff that you wanted, but you can make a repair and get yours without any issues whatsoever. And we ran into that issue with the aluminum boat multiple times. Something as simple as wanting to move a deck cleat that with a fiberglass boat, you would pull out the bolts for it, you would move it to wherever you want, drill new holes, put that in there, and you'd fill in the old holes. Negative and benefit of a metal boat is those items are typically welded on. So you don't have any deck penetrations, you don't have water that can leak in there. But that same issue, you need to move something. Now all of a sudden it requires cutting it actually off and re-welding it into a new place. Easy when you're in a boatyard, but when we're in the middle of Norway or we're in the middle of England trying to find someone that, a wharf, a dock that actually had high enough power that we could run a welder there, not happening. I mean, it just was not available. So whenever we needed to do something, we needed to find a commercial work yard and try to do something there, and that was difficult and expensive too.
So you kind of touched on the pros and cons of fiberglass here.
Yeah.
So yeah, the pros and cons of fiberglass as a hull material.
The fact that there are vast majority of them that are built that way, that definitely helps things out. There's a lot of people around the world. If you don't want to work on it yourself, there's a lot of people in any harbor, anywhere that has experience with it, that can do that work for you. There's a lot of good guidance there. The materials are readily available. So from a cruising aspect, that's one of the things I really like about it. Also, it is, depending on what the finish is, but with a gel coat finish, it's easy to keep it clean. It's easy to make it pretty. There's a reason why some of the metal boats have gone to a composite, a fiberglass deck, is because it's hard to mold these shapes out of metal to make that, to make it look good, make it not look like utilitarian item. And so you can pretty much do anything you want. You can do that with wood, you can do that with steel, but it doesn't take as much skill with fiberglass to get it right. It also, weight, again, for us being a performance boat, that is the big thing for us, and we can keep everything really light with us.
And then cons of fiberglass.
Cons of fiberglass.
If you can think of one.
I can think of a ton of them. It itches. Working with it, I am constantly scratching. It's a mess. The chemicals in it, in both epoxy, polyester, vinyl ester, are not good for your health. So you do have quite a bit of negative there. You have to keep yourselves with respirators on all the time when you're working on it. So there's some negatives there. Of course, it's the abrasion resistance. One of the reasons we went with a metal boat is because we were going up into ice, and fiberglass doesn't do as well. There are ways to make fiberglass perform extremely well against abrasion, but most boats aren't built that way. That's one of the negatives with it. Of course, it can be inexpensive to build with fiberglass, and that's the reason why most boats are built that way. You can mass produce with it, which is a great thing, actually. It allows people, you have a fiberglass boat. I had fiberglass boat before. If it was at that time when we were getting into sailing, if we were required to have a wood boat or steel boat or aluminum, we probably wouldn't be able to afford it, or we wouldn't be able to maintain it. This is just basically maintenance free, and it makes it so just about anybody can go out and sail.
And you just literally touched on the maintenance. What's maintenance like for fiberglass?
Yeah, we've had fiberglass before. It was That's probably the big thing. The aluminum boat did well. We were always constantly worried about corrosion. We were always worried about stuff. The fiberglass boat just existed. It just did its job. We had to go through and touch up gel coat. We had to go through and polish it out. Things that weren't actually necessary. They're for the cosmetic reasons of it, but it just, you know, made us feel good to do it. But beyond that, it just existed. It's the reason why, you know, you can buy these good old fiberglass boats, and everything may be completely gone, but that hull is still there, and the hull is just as solid as it was when it was made.
Now we have to talk about blisters and osmosis.
Blisters and osmosis was a thing that happened when they changed the formula for resins back in the late 70s, early 80s. It still can happen. There's of course been some a few boats that have had problems with that, but the vast majority of it's just a non-issue now with the formulations that they have with the resins. Really isn't a problem. It was a big issue for a very short period of time, about a decade, where it was a really big problem. After that, not so much. And it also depends on where you sail too. Where we're from in the Great Lakes originally, cold water, fresh water really didn't exist. There weren't blisters. It wasn't until you started getting down south that you saw boats littering the boat yards getting blister repairs done. Of course, there's ways to mitigate that risk by having a barrier coat, keeping that surface completely covered, so there's really no chance that water is going to be able to sit there and settle and cause that problems and the acid that forms in there.
Okay, so for someone shopping for a boat, things to look for and things to avoid with a fiberglass hull.
Things to avoid with a fiberglass hull. Good thing is for the fiberglass hulls are the things that were bad, that made bad fiberglass hulls, was long enough ago that all of those boats that have had those problems are pretty much gone. So some of the things that they were doing before with the chopper guns on some of the boats, which actually did make some very good boats with even chopper guns, but the early years of that, you know, there were some problems there they had, and those boats are gone. Now we're getting into the part where the design, the engineers and the designers have come up and they're been able to figure out exactly what is necessary, what's not, which helps reduce cost, which helps reduce weight, all those different things that go into that. In designing the boats, with the hull itself is not something I would be as concerned with. Certain boats, certain manufacturers have done a really good job about decoring when they drill through areas, when they penetrate through areas that have core, when they're installing winches or anything on deck, or sometimes even on the side of the hull too. So certain, unfortunately, it's the higher end manufacturers that were able to spend the time doing that. We're good about removing the core, encapsulating that area, so anything that penetrates through, if it leaks, it can't actually get into the core and rot that away. A lot of the mass-produced boats, they did not do that. But again, you know, it really hasn't been as big of an issue as people were thinking it was. If the boat was maintained and people fixed leaks as soon as they saw them, then it usually wasn't a problem. A little bit of moisture on the deck isn't the end of the world. It's sometimes correctable. It's when they've been neglected for a long period of time. And you can usually see that by going inside the boat. You can see the woodwork is all rotted out, or there's staining everywhere in the headliners and stuff like that. It's usually a pretty good indicator that there's been a long-term leak going on. And that's when you want to check around those parts and see if there's any issues there. You can go through, there's different ways of doing it. I typically tap a hull, so go around with a little rubber kind of mallet type of thing, a hard mallet, and you tap around that, and you can sound for both kind of moisture in there, but really what you're looking for is delamination. So it's where the fiberglass attaches to the coring material. You can kind of hear, it's very apparent. 10 minutes of hearing what's good and bad, you'll know the difference between them. You tap around it and you can usually get a really good idea as if there's problems, if there's areas that have been leaking for long periods of time and you have delamination in that coring. It's something, get a survey done and be there during the survey so you can watch and see what they're doing. And then the next time around, you'll be able to do a lot of it yourself.
Thanks for watching this episode of Sailing Wisdom. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next Rigging Doctor episode. And if you're interested in even more Rigging Doctor awesomeness, consider becoming a patron to see all of our extras. Can't wait to see you next time as you join us out here on the high seas.